Ma'am, with all due respect, what's your call sign? The question tossed playfully across the busy dining hall, dripped with a fake, theatrical interest. It came from a Marine captain, his desert uniform sleeves folded precisely. His name badge read Davis. He leaned forward, a sneaky smile playing on his lips, meant more for the two younger lieutenants beside him than for her. It was all a show. Sierra Knox didn't even glance up from her plate. She calmly finished chewing a piece of grilled chicken, her movements slow and careful. Her bright blue top, a simple civilian shirt, stood out among all the green and tan uniforms. That blue shirt was the reason for the captain's mistaken confidence. To him, she was just a civilian, maybe a hired worker, or an assistant to some important visitor who'd taken a wrong turn on the way to the officers' club. She was an outsider. "I'm sorry?" she asked, her voice steady, finally looking directly at him. Her eyes were clear, unwavering, showing nothing at all. "Your call sign," Captain Davis repeated, louder this time, enjoying the way everyone at nearby tables started to pay attention. "You're here at VMA 2014, the Black Sheep Squadron. Everyone has a call sign. It's what pilots do. Or did your husband just tell you the exciting stories?" One of the lieutenants snickered. The other looked down at his mashed potatoes, a small show of decency. Sierra's face didn't change. Draped over the back of her chair was a muted green flight jacket. A single emblem was sewn onto the right side of the chest, its stitching slightly worn. It showed a fierce Grim Reaper holding a broken hydraulic hose that dripped thick, oily liquid. Below it, stitched in black, were two words. Davis hadn't bothered to notice. He was too busy looking at her blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun, at her everyday clothes, at the woman he had already judged and decided was unimportant. "I don't think we've met," Sierra stated, her tone quiet but carrying an unexpected weight that seemed to hush the clatter of silverware around them. "I'm Sierra Knox." Captain Davis gave a grand nod as if granting her a special meeting. "Squadron adjutant, which means I handle all the arrivals and departures here, and I don't have a record of a visitor named Knox on our log for today's flight operation briefing." He was digging, trying to trap her in a lie to show everyone she didn't belong. "I'm not here for the brief," she answered simply. She took a sip of water. The quiet stare down was starting to attract more curious eyes. Marines are taught to notice anything out of place, and the growing tension at that table was like a flashing red light. Davis's smile tightened. His once friendly, patronizing tone was now turning into pure annoyance. He had expected her to get flustered, to blush, to explain she was just waiting for her pilot husband. Her calm behavior was a direct challenge to his power in this area. "Look, ma'am," he said, dropping all pretense of politeness. "This is a secure military area. The dining hall is for uniformed staff, their family members and approved contractors. I need to see your ID." He wasn't wrong about the rule itself, but the way he used it was like a weapon. Dozens of civilians, actual contractors, retired soldiers in golf shirts, and visiting relatives ate there every day without a second glance. He had singled her out. Sierra held his gaze for a long moment. She could have ended it right there. Her military ID was in her pocket. One quick flash of her Marine Corps insignia, or in her case the Air Force wings, would have instantly wiped away his smug certainty. But something in his swagger, in that casual, deeply rooted way he dismissed her, made her pause. She had seen that look before, in meeting rooms, on flight lines, during promotion evaluations. It was a subtle, constant irritation she had learned to deal with her entire career. "My identification is in my jacket," she said, her voice still infuriatingly calm. "I'm just trying to finish my lunch." This, for Davis, was the breaking point. It was pure defiance. He pushed his chair back, the metal legs scraping loudly against the floor tiles. The sharp noise caused several nearby conversations to stop. "The jacket with the little fake patch on it," he scoffed, finally pointing to her flight jacket. "Right, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. We need to confirm who you are and why you're on my base." "My base." The words hung in the air. One of his lieutenants shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, maybe we should just—" "Quiet, Lieutenant," Davis snapped, his eyes fixed on Sierra. He felt the weight of everyone's attention, and mistakenly thought it was a sign of support. He was the protector of his group, the enforcer of the rules, putting an imposter in her place. Sierra slowly set her fork down on her tray. She looked at Captain Davis, her eyes taking in the crisp lines of his uniform, the silver bars on his collar, his sharp haircut. She saw a man who had likely never had to explain his presence a single day in his life. A man for whom the uniform was both a shield and a cloak, making the person inside seem less important than the rank displayed. He looked at her and saw a blue shirt, a woman, an oddity. He couldn't see the uniform she wasn't wearing. Her eyes drifted past him, across the crowded room, and for a split second, Her calm expression wavered. It wasn't a break, but a flicker of deep, bone-tired weariness. An old, sharp, unwelcome memory surfaced, not of battle but of a classroom at the academy. A gruff old instructor droning on about the history of women in flight. He'd called them aviatrixes, a word that sounded like it belonged in an old black and white film. He'd spent more time talking about their hair and their spirit than their actual flight hours or their important contributions. The condescension was the same, a different uniform, a different room, the same old feeling of judgment. "Captain," she stated, her voice now cold and precise, stripped of all warmth. "You have two choices. You can go back to your seat and finish your meal, or you can continue this path. I feel it's fair to tell you that the second choice will have a major and bad impact on your career. The decision is yours." The warning was so direct, so lacking in emotion, that it stunned him. For the first time, a sliver of doubt broke through his arrogance, but he was too far in. The eyes of his junior officers, of the whole dining hall, were on him. Backing down now was impossible. "Is that a threat, ma'am?" he asked, his voice low. "It's a weather forecast," Sierra replied. Across the room, sitting alone at a small table by the window, Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole steadily ate his food. He was a lifer, a career Marine who had spent more years in the military than Davis had been alive. He had noticed the woman in the blue top when she first walked in, not because she was a woman, but because of the way she carried herself. There was an efficient grace to her movements, a quiet awareness in how she scanned the room before choosing a seat with her back to the wall. It was a habit you picked up in places where knowing the exits was key to survival. He hadn't paid much attention to the unfolding drama at first. Young, overly confident captains were always in plentiful supply in the Marine Corps. But then he heard Davis get loud, heard him mention the jacket. Cole's eyes drifted to the green flight jacket, hanging over the chair. He squinted. The light from the window caught the emblem, a grim reap, a dripping hydraulic line. Cole's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He knew that patch. He'd seen it before, not in person, but in a blurry photograph attached to a mission report he'd reviewed years ago. It was from a secret joint operation in a place full of mountains and danger, a special air unit that flew missions most people would never hear about. They were like ghosts. His eyes snapped back to the woman, blonde hair, calm demeanor. It couldn't, the pilot in that report, the flight leader. They called her, the memory hit him with a jolt, her call sign. He couldn't recall the specific name, but he remembered the legend. A cold dread formed in Cole's stomach. This wasn't just a captain being foolish. This was a captain poking a sleeping dragon with a sharp stick. He watched Davis stand up, watched him puff out his chest. Cole knew this was mere seconds from becoming a major institutional embarrassment. He stood, leaving his half-eaten lunch on the table. He walked calmly, with clear purpose, out of the dining hall, his eyes never leaving the back of Captain Davis's head. He knew what he had to do. The captain was a problem for later. Right now he had to warn the tower. He had to inform the base commander who had just landed on their base. He pulled his phone from his pocket as the dining hall doors swung shut behind him. He didn't have the colonel's personal number, but he had the next best thing, the base's sergeant major. He pressed the contact and raised the phone to his ear, his thoughts racing. "Gunny Cole here," he said when the call connected, his voice urgent. "Sergeant Major, you're not going to believe this, but I think Sticky 6 is in our chow hall." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a sharp gasp of air. "Cole, are you sure?" Sergeant Major Cole asked, his voice stern. "I saw the patch, and I'm watching Captain Davis from VMA 21 trying to kick her out for not having an ID." The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. It was the sound of a career ending. "Keep watching them, Gunny." The sergeant major's voice was like grinding rocks. "Don't get involved. The colonel and I are on our way." 5 minutes. Inside the base headquarters building, far from the noisy dining hall, Colonel Jensen was going over budget plans when his sergeant major appeared in the doorway. His face showed a look of urgent control. Sergeant Major Thorne hadn't knocked. That alone was a huge warning sign. "Sir, we have a situation at the East Dining Hall," Thorne said, his voice low. Jensen looked up, annoyed by the interruption. "What is it, Sergeant Major? Did the salad bar run out of dressing again?" "No, sir. Master Gunnery Sergeant Cole just called me. He says Major Sierra Knox is in the dining hall." Jensen frowned. The name was unfamiliar, and Major Knox, sir, is Air Force. Her call sign is Sticky. The name hit the quiet office like a hand grenade. Colonel Jensen's posture changed instantly. The relaxed slouch of an administrator vanished, replaced by the rigid attention of a battle-hardened commander. He dropped the pen he was holding. It clattered on the shiny oak of his desk. "Sticky 6, he repeated. the name tasting of gunpowder and jet fuel. He hadn't heard it in years. But you didn't forget a story like that. A story whispered with deep respect at joint command meetings, and in the smoking areas outside top-secret intelligence vaults. Are we certain it's her? Cole saw her special operations patch, sir, Thorne confirmed. And apparently Captain Davis is having a professional disagreement with her about base access. Jensen swore under his breath, a single sharp sound. He stood and walked to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He pulled up the Joint Military Personnel database, his security clearance granting him access to files most people would never see. He typed in the name Knox Sierra. Her file appeared. The photo showed the same woman Cole had described. Blonde hair, impossibly calm eye. But it was the text below the photo that made the air in the room feel thin. Major, USAF, Special Operations Command Liaison 2. The rest was blanked out. Below that, a list of awards. Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor, multiple air medals, a Purple Heart, and then, the detailed write-up for the Distinguished Flying Cross. It was heavily censored, but key phrases jumped out. Sustained heavy damage to own aircraft, without navigational aids, under direct enemy fire. Successful combat search and rescue of downed aircraft. Get the car, Jensen ordered, his voice tight with command. And get Major Evans from my staff. Now. He was already pulling on his uniform jacket, his movements quick and efficient. He knew how important appearances were in this situation. Captain Davis wasn't just bothering a visitor. He was insulting a decorated war hero from another branch of the military on their own base. It was a terrible failure of leadership and professionalism, and it was about to be fixed very, very publicly. Back in the dining hall, Captain Davis had reached a point of no return. Sierra's quiet defiance, her weather forecast, had pushed him too far. His authority in front of his men was at stake. All right, that's enough. You're coming with me, he said, his voice rising. He reached out not to touch her but in a come-here gesture that was both impatient and dismissive. We can do this the easy way, or I can have the military police escort you. Your choice. But you are leaving this place now. I'm almost convinced that Patch is a fraudulent wearing of a unit badge, and that's a federal crime. The accusation hung in the air, nasty and final. Fraudulent wear. It was one of the worst insults you could throw at someone in the military community, an accusation of faking heroism. Sierra slowly rose to her feet. She wasn't tall, but she stood with such solid stillness that she seemed to take up more space than she did. She looked at Davis, and for the first time he saw something other than calm in her eyes. It wasn't anger, it was pity. As you wish, Captain, she said, her voice sounding resigned. It was at that exact moment that the main doors to the dining hall swung open. The sudden silence was absolute. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Colonel Jensen strode into the room, his presence sucking the air out of the space. He was flanked by Sergeant Major Thorne, whose face was like carved stone, and a sharp-looking female Marine, Major Evans. They moved not like they were entering a cafeteria, but like they were stepping onto a parade ground for an inspection. Their pace was measured, their eyes forward. They scanned the room once, their gaze falling on the small knot of tension in the center of the hall, and then moved directly toward it. The entire dining hall population, as if pulled by a single string, rose to its feet. The sound of 100 chairs scraping back at once was the only noise. Captain Davis froze, his face losing all color. He snapped to attention so quickly he almost swayed, his mind struggling to understand what was happening. The base commander was here, in the middle of lunch, and he was walking straight toward him. The trio stopped a few feet from the table. Colonel Jensen's eyes were like chips of ice. He completely ignored Captain Davis. His gaze was fixed on Sierra. He took one more step forward, stopped, and gave a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to slice through the air. Major Knox, he said, his voice echoing with deep, formal respect in the vast, silent room. Colonel Jensen, Base Commander, welcome to Marine Corps Air Station Miramar. I must apologize for this reception. We weren't aware you were visiting today. Sierra returned the salute with a practiced ease that was completely at odds with her civilian blouse. Colonel, no apology necessary, I was just grabbing a quick meal. Davis's world was spinning. Major, the colonel had called her Major. He had saluted her. The woman in the blue top. He felt a wave of nausea. Colonel Jensen held his salute for a moment longer before sharply lowering it. He then slowly turned his head, his eyes finally landing on Captain Davis, who looked as if he were about to faint. Captain, Jensen said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. I understand you were curious about the Major's call sign. Davis swallowed hard. Sir, he stammered, his voice a dry whisper. I was just following procedure for base security. Were you? The colonel interrupted, his voice cutting like glass. Because it looked to me like you were harassing a decorated officer from a sister service. Major Knox is here as a guest of USACOM, preparing to brief my senior staff on joint operational tactics. Tactics she learned firsthand. He took a step closer to Davis, lowering his voice so only those at the table could hear, but the intensity of his anger was felt throughout the room. That patch on her jacket, the one you called a costume, that's the insignia of a Special Operations Joint Air Detachment she commanded. They don't just hand those out, they're forged in blood and fire. Then Jensen raised his voice again, turning slightly so his words carried across the dining hall to the silently watching Marines. Some of you may have heard stories, he began, his voice the deep, resonant tone of a commander addressing his troops. Stories about a pilot who during a night mission deep in enemy territory had her wingman's aircraft crippled by a surface-to-air missile. The wingman's jet was losing all hydraulic pressure, its controls seizing up. They were going to have to bail out over mountains swarming with enemy fighters. A hush fell over the room. This was the language of legend. Their flight leader, flying a jet that was also damaged and leaking fuel, refused to abandon him. She flew a protective figure-8 pattern around the damaged jet for almost an hour, fighting off occasional ground fire, coordinating a combat search and rescue team, and guiding her terrified wingman through the emergency step. Her own fuel tanks were ruptured, sloshing jet fuel all over the plane, making it dangerously sticky and threatening to explode with every tracer round that flew past. Jensen's eyes met Sierra's. There was a deep respect in his gaze. She stayed in position until the rescue aircraft were in sight. Only then, with her own fuel gauge at 0, did she guide her plane back across the border, landing on the last drops of fuel. She saved 2 lives that night in a $30 million aircraft. That pilot was Major Knox. The aircrew she saved gave her the call sign Sticky. Sticky for the fuel-soaked jet she refused to leave, and 6 because she always stands by her wingman. The story finished. The colonel turned his full attention back to the pale, trembling captain. So yes, Captain Davis, he said, his voice now a low growl of pure anger. She has a call sign. She earned it in a way I pray to God you never have to, and you will address her as Major, or Ma'am. He paused, letting the weight of his words crush the captain's spirit. My office, in 5 minutes. You, me, and the Sergeant Major are going to have a detailed talk about leadership, professionalism, and the United States Marine Corps standards for respect. Dismissed. Davis, his face ashen, managed a shaky eye. Sir, he didn't dare look at Sierra. He turned and practically ran from the dining hall, the combined stare of 200 Marines burning into his back. Colonel Jensen then turned back to Sierra, his expression softening immediately. Major, again on behalf of the entire command, I am truly sorry. Please allow me to escort you to the officers' club. Lunch is on me. Sierra offered a small, tired smile. She looked around at the faces of the young Marines, staring at her with new, open admiration. Thank you, Colonel, she said, but that won't be necessary. It was a misunderstanding. She then looked directly at Major Evans, the female officer who had come with the colonel. The only thing we need to do is make sure our people understand the standard. The same standard for everyone. Don't make it softer, just apply it fairly. See the uniform, not just the person wearing it. Or in this case, she added with a knowing glance at her blue top, recognize the character of someone who wears it even when they're not. Her words were a masterclass in graciousness. She didn't demand an apology or revenge. She offered a lesson, a way to set things right. As she spoke, a final vivid memory echoed in her mind. Not the whole chaotic event, but one clear moment from that night. The cockpit was filled with the bitter smell of burning electronics, and the sickly sweet scent of airborne jet fuel. Red lights flashed across the instrument panel, a Christmas tree of severe failures. Below her, the dark, jagged peaks of the mountains. On the radio, her wingman's breathing was ragged with fear, and through it all, she remembered the feel of the control stick in her hand, slick and sticky with the hydraulic fluid that had sprayed from a broken line in her own canopy. Sticky, it was the last thing she felt before she pressed the radio button, and said in a voice she barely recognized as her own, "Hang on, buddy, I'm not leaving you." That was the moment Sticky 6 was born. In the darkness, in the danger, in the quiet, absolute refusal to let a fellow warrior fall. The weeks that followed Captain Davis's public shame became an example of how institutions can learn and adapt. He wasn't kicked out of the Marine Corps. Colonel Jensen believed that would be a waste of a man who, though arrogant, could still become a good officer if he truly learned from his errors. Instead, Davis was removed as squadron adjutant and moved to a staff position at the base headquarters. It was a humbling desk job where he was given a very specific task: to rework the required yearly training on fair treatment and professional conduct for the entire air station. He had to stand in front of his peers and his subordinates, and teach the exact lesson he had so spectacularly failed to live by. It was a carefully given, long-term dose of humility. Colonel Jensen, listening to Sierra's wise words, also started a new welcome brief for all new personnel. Part of this brief, now led by Major Evans, included a section on working together with other military branches, stressing politeness and respect towards members of other services, no matter what uniform they wore, or didn't wear, when visiting the base. Pictures of distinguished women in uniform, including Sierra Knox, were added to the historical displays in the headquarters lobby. The change was subtle but clear. This was everyone's Marine Corps. About a month later, Sierra was back on the base for another meeting. She was at the base store, looking for a gift for her father, when she heard a hesitant voice behind her. "Ma'am?" She turned. It was Captain Davis. He was in his formal service uniform, looking younger and much less confident than he had in the dining hall. He stood rigidly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Captain," she acknowledged with a neutral nod. He swallowed, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over her shoulder. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize properly. What I did there was no excuse. It was unprofessional, disrespectful, and ignorant. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The words came out stiffly, but they were sincere. She could still see the deep shame burning in his eyes. Sierra studied him for a moment. She saw not the arrogant officer from the dining hall, but a humbled man who had been forced to face a deep-seated prejudice he probably hadn't even realized he held. "I appreciate that, Captain," she said, her voice softening slightly. "Apology accepted." He seemed to visibly relax with relief. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm running the new professional conduct training now. Your story, the Colonel's story about your call sign, it's the main focus of the leadership module." A faint ironic smile touched her lips. "Is it now?" "Yes, ma'am. It's about not making assumptions, about looking for the true value beneath the surface." He finally met her eyes. "I'm trying, ma'am, to be a better officer." Sierra nodded slowly. "That's all anyone can ask, Captain. Keep your sleeves rolled sharp, but keep your mind open." She offered a small parting nod. "Good luck." As she walked away, leaving him standing in the aisle, she felt a sense of completion. It wasn't about winning or getting even. It was about the slow, difficult work of improving the institution, one corrected assumption, one humbled captain at a time. Her call sign was a reminder of a night of fire and fear, but perhaps now on this base, it would also be a quiet reminder to always look deeper, to respect the warrior, not just how they appear.